Hello, welcome back to CST 2120. So in this lecture I'm going to cover HTML and CSS validation. So validation checks the structure of data or markup files to make sure that they're correct. So for example, it looks for errors in HTML, CSS, XML and JSON. And you often use a schema to specify the correct structure of the document, and then the validation will check that the schema, that the document matches the schema, that all the fields are in the right place and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So HTML and CSS validation's pretty important, I'd say, because it's really easy to miss errors in HTML and CSS. So a lot of you in your kind of front ends, course at one, had quite a few errors in the HTML, and sometimes that created real problems because sometimes the JavaScript wouldn't work because the document object model was all messed up, and sometimes the browsers were rendering things very differently because browsers tend to browsers will do their best to render according to the HTML and CSS standards, and they do a pretty good job these days of making sure that all web pages look roughly the same on different browsers. But once errors kick in, there is no standard for how they handle errors, so they're just really making a best guess about how the web page should look. And so when you have errors in your HTML and CSS, you're seeing the best guess of Chrome, Safari, Edge, and so on and so forth, and those best guesses may be different depending on how they're implemented. Yeah. And obviously, if you're delivering this to a customer, you should make sure that HTML and CSS comply with appropriate standards, like doc type declarations, use of alt tag and images, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I'm going to cover, it's very simple really, but I'll explain HTML validation and CSS validation. So there's probably some clever libraries out there that will do validation for you, but the easiest way to check the validity of your HTML and CSS is using validation services. Yeah. Obviously, we'd want to maybe automate that as a unit test at some point, but for this coursework, I just want you to do some validation and understand the ideas behind it, so for that purpose, validation services are a good choice, yeah? If we had a public URL, it's really easy to do, otherwise you can just upload the file, or in some cases paste in the HTML. In your case, I'm expecting you to upload your files, yeah? So there's to check the HTML, there's a thing called the W3C markup validation service. There's the URL. And you can either enter the public URL of a website, you can upload the HTML file, or you can just paste the HTML in. Yeah, but the best option in this case is the file upload. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm expecting for you to do. Yeah. So to show you all this working, I've created an example of invalid HTML here. And if I upload this to the validation service, it'll give us this error message, warning in this case. So warnings are things that should be there, and errors are things that must be there, yeah? So in this case, I've got a warning and an error. You should fix both, yeah? And the problem was I hadn't put the right extra tags in about the language and character encoding, yeah? So if I put those in my valid HTML example, upload it again, then here I've got, it tells me that it's all worked, yeah? So what I would expect is for your final report, take a screenshot of this, showing that it's passed. If there's any errors or warnings, we'll, give you half marks, but we won't give you full marks, yeah? So, and since these are really easy to fix and explains it really easily, you should all be able to get your HTML to pass, yeah? CSS validation works in a similar way, except a different URL. In this case, that slightly complicated link there. And again, we can upload it by public URL, we can upload it by pasting it in, or better, upload your CSS files, yeah? So we upload the CSS files. Look, in this case, an invalid CSS file, just to demonstrate. And look at the results. And here we've got the error message explaining what the problem is. And usually these are pretty clear. You must put unit after your number. So let's do that. We put a unit after our number, upload it again, and then we get CSS validation passed, yeah? And again, this screenshot should be included in your final report if you want to get the 2.5 marks for CSS validation. So let's just show you it in practice, yeah? I think it's a little easier, right? So let's go start with the HTML validation. So, like I said, we can validate if we had a public URL or URI, we could paste that in there, or we could even paste the HTML in there, but I would think it's better for your projects to do file upload. So here's my sort of broken web page. So this is this one here, missing the tags that we needed to define language and document coding, character encoding. So we upload the website, we select the website, the file we want to upload, click on check. And you can see here I've got the character encodings missing and the language is also missing, which is kind of recommended but not required, yeah? So I fix that, in my fixed version of this, click on check, And then this is what we should see, which is like document checking completed, no errors or warning to show, yeah? And this screenshot here should be sent, and it tells me the file name as well, so I also can check that it's your actual file. And, I may randomly check some of your HTML files to see if you actually did this to make sure that, you did it correctly, yeah? Now CSS validation, same thing, by file upload in this case. So here's the thing with the error, the CSS file with the error in it. And here we got helpful error, right? It'll tell me which page, which line 5, and this is what's wrong. The 30 must have a unit after the number. This is why it's so important doing this stuff, yeah? And so I read the errors, I correct it in good CSS. Good CSS here has the 30 pixels, whereas bad CSS has that value missing. Let me go back here, upload the good one, and check it. And then here, it gives us a nice, screenshot. And then this screenshot should go in your final project report. And then we can give you the marks for the CSS validation. So it's pretty easy. Strongly recommend you do it. It's one of the easiest 5 marks in this module. So all you got to do is upload your files and fix any errors in them, yeah? Which should be pretty straightforward, yeah? So the marks for this in coursework 2, I expect you to validate your HTML and CSS files and include the output in your final reports. You'll lose marks if your HTML and CSS does not pass. If you've got errors or warnings, you'll lose marks for that, yeah? Okay, so the purpose of validation is to check that data and markup files have the right structure. Yeah, that's important from the point of view of browsers being able to display your website consistently, your JavaScript being able to run run in the browser, and also to comply with appropriate standards. So alt tags and images help, like the visually impaired, for example. Yeah. There are marks for this HTML validation and CSS validation in coursework 2, and it must pass, yeah? You'll get half the marks available if your HTML or CSS do not pass, yeah? If you're half the marks for HTML errors kind of thing, half marks for CSS errors, yeah? So they must pass, and you must include the screenshots in your project report, or we'll assume you haven't done it, basically. Okay? And that's it.